They say that in space you cannot hear a scream. But that isn't true. Not really. When the hull buckles, when the titanium groans under the pressure of a directed energy weapon, the sound travels through the floor, up through your boots, and vibrates directly into your skull. You hear the ship scream before you hear your own voice. And for the last 6 months, that is the sound that has haunted the dreams of every pilot, every Marine, and every admiral in the United Systems Navy. Welcome back to the dark frontier. Today, we return to the void. We return to the story that has kept us looking up at the night sky with a shiver running down our spines. This is part 3 of the Chronicle. The silence has broken. The radar shadows have solidified. We thought we had survived the skirmishes. We thought we understood the enemy. We were wrong. This is the Black Ship 3, the next Space War's epic beginning. To understand where we are now, we have to go back to the stillness. It has been 180 days since the incident at the Titan perimeter. 180 days since the Black Ship, that monolith of light-absorbing metal, vanished into the slipstream, leaving nothing but debris and confusion in its wake. Commander Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Vanguard, staring out into the starfield of Sector 7. This was the edge of civilized space. Beyond this point, the maps just said, deep dark. Thorne was a man who had aged 10 years in the last 6 months. His hair was grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. He had seen the Black Ship with his own eyes during the first encounter. He had watched it swallow a frigate whole, its hull opening like the maw of a leviathan. The official report said it was a rogue stealth prototype, a terror weapon developed by separatists. Thorne knew better. He had seen the way that ship moved. It didn't use thrusters. It didn't burn fuel. It moved like a hole in the universe, sliding through reality rather than pushing against it. "Commander," the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins cut through his reverie. She was at the sensor station, her face bathed in the pale blue glow of the monitors. "I'm picking up ghosts." Thorne turned, the leather of his gloves creaking as he gripped the railing. "Ghosts, Lieutenant, be specific." "Gravimetric distortions," Jenkins said, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Micro fluctuations in the local grid. It's like something is heavy out there, sir, something massive. But the LiDAR isn't bouncing off anything. It's just empty space." This was how it started. Thorne felt the cold knot tighten in his stomach. The Black Ship didn't show up on radar until it wanted to be seen. It was designed to be a predator. "Sound general quarters," Thorne ordered, his voice low and steady. "Quiet alarm. I don't want panic. I want readiness." The bridge crew moved with disciplined urgency. The lights shifted from standard white to combat red. The hum of the Vanguard's reactor pitched up, a deep thrumming vibration that signaled the charging of the railguns. "Distortions increasing," Jenkins called out, her voice rising an octave. "Sir, the readings, they match the signature from Titan. It's exact." Thorne looked back out the viewport. The stars looked normal. The darkness looked empty. But he knew it was out there. "Comms," Thorne barked. "Get me Admiral Vance at Fleet Command. Tell him the Shadow is back." But before the comms officer could even open a channel, the universe tore open. It didn't warp in. There was no flash of Cherenkov radiation, no swirling vortex of blue light that usually accompanied a ship exiting slipspace. Instead, the darkness simply became darker. A section of the starfield, directly in front of the Vanguard, was blotted out. It was as if someone had spilled ink on a painting. And then the lights on the Vanguard flickered. The Black Ship had arrived. It was larger than Thorne remembered, or perhaps his memory had tried to shrink it to make it comprehensible. It was a jagged, asymmetrical nightmare of engineering. There were no visible windows, no exhaust ports, no markings. The surface was a material so black it hurt the eyes to look at it, a true vantablack that absorbed 99.9% of all spectrums. It looked two-dimensional, a silhouette cut out of paper, until it began to rotate. "Target lock," Thorne shouted. "Fire main batteries." He didn't wait for hailing frequencies. He didn't wait for diplomacy. You don't negotiate with a hurricane. The Vanguard shuddered as its dual railguns fired. Two distinct trails of superheated plasma streaked through the void, closing the distance to the black ship in a heartbeat. The rounds were traveling at a fraction of the speed of light, carrying enough kinetic energy to crack a small moon. They hit the black ship, and nothing happened. There was no explosion, no shower of sparks. The rounds simply impacted the dark hull and vanished, absorbed. It was as if the ship had eaten the energy. "Damage report on the target," Thorne demanded. "Zero, sir," the tactical officer replied, disbelief dripping from his words. "No hull breach, no shield flare. It just took it." Then the black ship responded. It didn't fire a laser. It didn't launch a missile. A section of its hull shifted, sliding open with a movement that looked almost organic. A crimson light began to build in the center of the opening. It wasn't the clean red of a laser. It was a dirty, violent blood red, crackling with arcs of unstable electricity. "Evasive maneuvers! Hard to port!" Thorne screamed. The pilot threw the Vanguard into a desperate turn, the inertial dampeners struggling to keep the crew from being pasted against the bulkheads. But the Vanguard was a heavy cruiser, not a fighter. It was fast, but not fast enough. A beam of red energy erupted from the black ship. It didn't strike the Vanguard directly. It struck the space beside it. The beam detonated, creating a localized shock wave of gravity. The Vanguard was slammed sideways, tumbling like a toy in a dryer. Alarm screamed, consoles sparked and exploded. Thorne was thrown from his feet, his shoulder colliding hard with the command chair. "Status," he groaned, pulling himself up. "Shields down to 40%, Jenkins yelled, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Whatever that was, it destabilized our fusion core. We're losing power to the engines." This wasn't a skirmish anymore. This was the opening shot of a war. Thorne looked at the tactical display. The black ship was moving. It wasn't just sitting there. It was accelerating toward the Vanguard. And behind it, emerging from the dark shadow it cast, were others. Smaller ships, but small is relative. These were Corvette-sized vessels, identical in design to the mothership, sleek, black, and silent. 3 of them, then 5, then 10. "It's a carrier," Thorne whispered. "It's not just a battleship. It's a carrier." This changed everything. In the previous encounters, the black ship had always been alone. A solitary hunter. Now it had brought a pack. "Signal the fleet," Thorne ordered, wiping the sweat from his eyes. "Wide band, unencrypted. Tell them we are engaging a hostile armada at Sector 7. Tell them the black ship has multiplied." The smaller black vessels, which the crew would later call shadows, swarmed toward the Vanguard. They moved with a terrifying synchronization, like a flock of birds or a school of fish. They didn't fire energy weapons. Instead, they launched physical pods, boarding torpedoes. "Point defense," Thorne roared. "Don't let them attach." The Vanguard's autocannons lit up the dark, tracing lines of fire into the swarm. Explosions blossomed as 2 of the shadows were torn apart, their debris revealing not metal, but a strange crystalline internal structure. But there were too many. Thud, thud, thud. 3 distinct vibrations shook the hull. Hull breach on decks 4, 5, and 9. The security chief shouted over the comms. They're cutting through! Intruders imminent! Thorne grabbed the assault rifle stored beneath the command console. He racked the slide. Marines to the breach points! Repel boarders! Bridge crew, lock the blast doors! We hold this ship! The battle for the Vanguard had turned from a naval engagement into a brutal close-quarters fight. But Thorne knew the Vanguard was already lost. The real battle was for the information. They had to survive long enough to scan the black ship to analyze the data of that gravity weapon and beam it back to Earth. If they died without sending that data, humanity was flying blind. Jenkins, Thorne said, moving to her side, focus all sensor arrays on the mothership. I want a spectral analysis of that hull. I want to know what powers it, and I want it transmitted to High Command, now. Sir, the transmission array is damaged, Jenkins said, her hand shaking. I can't send a long-range burst. I need to route it through the comms buoy, but the buoy is 20,000 kilometers away. Then we get closer to the buoy, Thorne said. Helm, set a collision course for the comms buoy. Full impulse. Sir, that will take us right past the black ship, the pilot warned. Do it. The Vanguard, bleeding oxygen and venting plasma, corrected its tumble and surged forward. It was a suicide run. The black ship loomed ahead, filling the entire viewport. It was a mountain of death. As they closed the distance, the details of the black ship became visible. It wasn't smooth. The surface was writhing. Millions of tiny mechanical tendrils covered the hull, constantly repairing, shifting, and reconfiguring. It was a living machine. Scanning, Jenkins said, her voice tight. My God, sir, the readings. It's not just absorbing light, it's harvesting it. The hull is a photovoltaic collector on a quantum scale. It feeds on starlight. It feeds on laser fire. That's why our weapons didn't hurt it. We were refueling it. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the life support failing. It eats energy. Transmission ready in 30 seconds, Jenkins said. But the black ship wasn't going to let them pass. The massive red eye in the center of the ship began to glow again. Evasive, Thorne yelled. This time the gravity beam didn't miss. It hit the Vanguard dead center. The sound was indescribable. It was the sound of metal screaming in agony. The artificial gravity on the bridge failed, then reversed, then tripled. Thorne was pinned to the floor, the weight of his own body crushing his lungs. The lights shattered, sparks rained down like fireworks. Status, Thorne wheezed. Main power offline, someone screamed in the dark. Emergency reserves only. We've lost propulsion. They were drifting, dead in the water, and they were still 10,000 kilometers from the buoy. Did the data send? Thorne asked, coughing in the smoke-filled air. No, sir, Jenkins cried. Signal jammed. They're jamming everything. Thorne looked at the tactical map on his wrist pad. The red dots of the borders were moving through the ship. Decks 4 and 5 were gone. The Marines were falling back to the engineering deck. We have to manually launch the probe, Thorne said, standing up against the tilting deck. The black box probe. It has a localized burst transmitter. If we physically launch it, it might clear the jamming field. The launch bay is 3 decks down, the security chief said, through the borders. Thorne checked his rifle. Then we fight our way down. This is the moment that defines a leader. Not the speeches, not the medals. It's the moment when you look at impossible odds and decide to step forward anyway. Thorne left the bridge to his executive officer. He took a squad of 6 bridge guards and headed into the corridor. The hallways of the Vanguard were a flickering strobe light of emergency strobes. Smoke hung heavy in the air, smelling of ozone and burnt flesh. They encountered the first enemy at the junction of Deck 2. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an alien in a suit. The thing that came around the corner was a nightmare of chrome and carbon fiber. It looked vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its movements too jerky. It had no face, just a smooth black visor where eyes should be. "Contact front!" Thorne yelled and opened fire. The bullet sparked off the entity's armor. It didn't flinch. It raised an arm, which shifted and transformed into a blade of vibrating energy. It lunged. The firefight was chaos. 2 of Thorne's guards went down in seconds, sliced apart by the machine's speed. Thorne aimed for the joints, the only weak spots he could guess. He put a 3-round burst into the thing's knee. It faltered, stumbling. "Grenade!" one of the guards shouted, tossing a frag. The explosion blew the droid backward, shattering its chassis. But as it lay there, twitching, Thorne saw something that made his blood run cold. The inside of the machine wasn't just wires. There was organic matter, muscle fiber woven with copper. It was a cyborg. "Keep moving," Thorne ordered, stepping over the wreckage. They fought their way deck by deck. The sounds of battle were everywhere. The Vanguard was dying. The hull groaned as the black ship's tractor beams latched onto it, pulling it closer to the maw. When they reached the launch bay, only Thorne and Jenkins were left. Thorne was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his side. Jenkins was limping. The launch bay was surprisingly quiet. The probe, a small silver cylinder, sat in its tube. "I need to override the launch protocols," Jenkins said, rushing to the console. "The system is locked down." Thorne stood by the door, rifle raised. "Do it fast! They're coming!" He could hear the metal footsteps, the clicking of mechanical joints. The enemy was right behind them. "Access denied," Jenkins cursed. "Come on, come on!" The door to the bay began to melt. A red, cutting laser was slicing through the blast steel. "Jenkins!" Thorne yelled. "I'm in," she shouted. "Probe is armed. Launching in 3, 2... The door exploded inward. 3 of the cyborg horrors surged into the room. Thorne held the trigger down. He wasn't firing to kill anymore. He was firing to suppress. He needed to buy Jenkins 5 seconds. The bullets tore into the lead machine, knocking it back, but the other 2 flanked him. A pulse of energy hit Thorne in the chest, knocking the wind out of him, searing his armor. He fell back, gasping. "Launched!" Jenkins screamed. A thud and a whoosh signaled the probe firing out of the tube. It shot into the vacuum, its small thrusters kicking in, speeding away from the dying cruiser and the massive black ship. Thorne looked up from the floor. The machines were standing over him. The blade of the leader extended, humming with lethal energy. But they didn't strike. They stopped. The ship shuddered violently. "Commander," Jenkins whispered, looking at the viewport in the bay. "Look." Outside, the probe had detonated its signal burst, a flare of pure data energy. But that wasn't what Jenkins was looking at. Beyond the black ship, space was tearing open again. But this time, it wasn't the darkness arriving. It was the cavalry. The data from the initial engagement, the brief seconds before the jamming started, had reached the outlying listening posts. Admiral Vance hadn't waited for confirmation. He had sent the fleet. 50 United Systems warships dropped out of warp. Destroyers, frigates, and the massive super dreadnought Excalibur. "This is Admiral Vance to all hostile vessels," a voice boomed over the open frequency, powerful enough to cut through the jamming. "Step away from the Vanguard or be vaporized." The black ship paused. The machines in the launch bay froze, their heads tilting as if receiving new orders. For a moment, there was a standoff. The black ship, the devourer of light, faced off against the combined might of the human fleet. Then, the black ship did something unexpected. It spoke.
It wasn't a voice. It was a broadcast that hijacked every screen, every speaker, every headset in the fleet. It was a sound like grinding metal, overlaid with a synthesized voice that sounded like 1,000 people speaking in unison. The cycle is complete. The harvest begins. The machines in the launch bay deactivated their weapons. They backed away from Thorne and Jenkins, stepping into the airlock. They weren't retreating out of fear. They were leaving because they were done. Outside, the black ship and its swarm of shadows began to glow with a blinding violet light. The energy they had absorbed from the Vanguard's attack, the energy from the stars, they were channeling it. "They're powering a drive," Jenkins said, "but the readings are off the scale. They aren't jumping to another sector." "Where are they going?" Thorne rasped. "They're jumping everywhere," Jenkins said, her eyes wide. With a flash that momentarily outshone the local star, the black ship and its fleet vanished. But they didn't just disappear. The shock wave of their departure slammed into the human fleet, disabling sensors and rocking the massive dreadnoughts. Silence returned to the sector. The Vanguard was a wreck floating in the drift. Rescue shuttles were already launching from the Excalibur. Thorne pulled himself up, leaning against the launch console. He looked at Jenkins. They were alive. But the message, the harvest begins. Fast forward 2 weeks. Thorne stands in a briefing room on Earth. He is bandaged, leaning on a cane. Around a massive circular table sit the leaders of the United Systems, the Mars Federation, and the Outer Rim Alliance. Former enemies, now united by terror. On the holographic display in the center of the room, a map of the galaxy rotates. "Since the encounter at Sector 7, Admiral Vance says, his voice grave, we have received distress signals from 12 different systems. Mining colonies gone silent, patrolling fleets vanishing." He zooms in on the map. Red dots appear everywhere, not just on the frontier, deep in the core systems, near Earth, near Mars. "The black ship wasn't just a ship," Thorne says, his voice raspy. The room goes silent as he speaks. "It was a scout, a probe. It was testing us. It wanted to know what weapons we used. It wanted to know how we fight, and we showed it." Thorne points his cane at the hologram. "Those cyborgs, the things inside them, the organic components. We analyzed the DNA from the one we killed." Thorne pauses, letting the weight of the revelation hang in the air. "It was human DNA, but it wasn't from anyone born in our records. It was ancient, thousands of years old. And the tech? It's not alien, it's an evolution of our own lost designs from the dark age of technology. This isn't an invasion from another species." He looks around the room, meeting the eyes of the most powerful people in humanity. This is a civil war, a war against a branch of humanity that left Earth long before we discovered warp drive. They went into the dark, and they changed. They became the void, and now they've come back to reclaim the cradle. The Black Ship 3 wasn't just a battle. It was the bell ringing for the start of the end times. The enemy is faster. They are stronger. They eat our energy weapons for fuel, and they know us better than we know ourselves. As the meeting adjourns, Thorne walks to the window looking out over the sprawling megasea. The sky is blue. The sun is shining. But Thorne can't feel the warmth. All he can feel is the cold vacuum. He knows that up there, in the darkness between the stars, thousands of black ships are waking up. The lone wolf has called the pack.
The skirmishes are over. The mystery is over. The next space war has officially begun. And as Thorne looks up, he whispers the only thing that matters now. Prepare for impact. So, what happens next? How do you fight an enemy that absorbs your attacks? How do you fight an enemy that is, in a twisted way, your own reflection?
The United Systems are scrambling to retrofit their fleets with projectile weapons, old tech, bullets and missiles, abandoning lasers because they only feed the beast. Factories are churning out railguns. The draft has been reinstated. Every man, woman, and android is being called to the defense of the Sol system. But the enemy has the initiative, they have the technology, and they have the element of fear. This story is far from over. In Part 4, we will see the first major offensive. We will see the Black Ship Fleet descend upon a populated world. We will see if humanity has the will to survive against the darkness they helped create. But that is a story for another time. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, if you felt the chill of the void, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you want to be on the bridge when the next battle starts, subscribe and ring the bell. You do not want to miss the next chapter. The Black Ship is out there, and it is hungry. I'm your host, and until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, because they are watching you back.